You're listening to the story of a settler mother was drowning, but this lonely Navajo man gave her hope. It's a tale of sorrow, courage, and unexpected kindness, set in a time when the world was divided by fear and prejudice. So take a deep breath and let me take you back to the wind-swept plains, where one man's compassion would rewrite 3 lives forever. The wind sang a mournful tune across the high plains that afternoon, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant thunder. It curled around the low hills like a restless spirit, rattling the dry grass and whispering through the cracks of a solitary hogan. Inside, Takakota sat in silence. It had been this way for years now, silence so deep it pressed on his ears like water, drowning out even his own breath. Once, this hogan had been alive with laughter, or a soft humming as she ground maize, their son's tiny feet padding across the dirt floor. But then came the sickness, swift, cruel, and unstoppable. It took them both in a single winter storm. Leaving Takakota alone with the weight of their absence, he had learned to live in that silence. He hunted when he must, tended a small patch of maize and beans, performed the tasks that kept a man alive. But nothing of joy remained. The laughter had died with them. Beyond the hills, the world was changing. Settlers poured in like an unstoppable tide, their wagons carving raw scars across the land, their fences stretching like prison bars. Their sharp-edged houses looked strange beneath the infinite dome of sky. Takakota kept to the shadows of their expanding world. He'd learned early that to them, he was not a man, but a figure of suspicion, perhaps even fear. Best to remain unseen. The sky darkened now, heavy with the promise of rain. Takakota pulled his woven cloak tighter and set out with a bundle of traps slung over his shoulder. He followed a familiar trail to a tributary where he often checked for rabbits or fish. The air grew thick and humid, buzzing with the electric tension of a storm. He crouched near the water's edge, hands moving deftly as he checked his traps. A rabbit here, an empty one there. Routine. Routine kept the grief at bay. Then the sky split open with a deafening crack of thunder. Rain fell in sudden, blinding sheets. Takakota ducked under a rocky overhang, watching as the tributary transformed. Before his eyes, the calm stream became a roaring torrent, muddy water churning with uprooted branches and debris. He was about to turn back when something pale flashed in the water. At first he thought it was a piece of cloth tangled in the roots of a downed cottonwood, but then it shifted an arm. A woman. Takakota froze. His first instinct was caution. This was settler business, and involving himself could bring complications. But as he peered closer, he saw she was clutching something to her chest. A smaller bundle, a baby. His breath hitched. The walls he had built around his heart, the same walls that had kept him alive these last. Memories surged unbidden, his son's small fingers wrapping around his thumb, his son's fevered brow. The cold, silent body wrapped in a thin blanket. The current tugged at the woman's limp form, threatening to pull her under. The baby didn't. Cry, caution, self-preservation, grief. They all vanished in an instant. He dropped his traps and grabbed a sturdy branch from the bank. The river was waiting. The river struck him like a living thing. The moment Takakota stepped into the swollen tributary, icy water clawed at his legs with savage strength, nearly sweeping him off his feet. His moccasins sank deep into the mud, and the current tugged at his cloak, trying to drag him down like some hungry spirit. He gripped the branch tight, using it as a staff to steady himself. His breath came in sharp gasps. The water was colder than anything he had felt in years, biting through his skin and into his bones. But still, he pressed on. The woman's body bobbed against the tangled roots of the cottonwood. Her pale hair, plastered across her face like wet corn silk, swirled in the eddies. The bundle in her arms sagged ominously. The child was too still. Every step was a battle. The river roared in his ears, drowning out everything but the pounding of his own heart. He pushed forward, teeth clenched, ignoring the ache in his legs and the growing numbness in his feet. At last, he reached her. Even unconscious, the woman's arms clung fiercely to the child. Her face was ghostly pale, lips tinged blue. He wedged The branch into the roots for leverage and pried her grip loose, murmuring under his breath words in his own language, words he hadn't spoken aloud in months. He pulled the baby free first. It was small and slick, wrapped in sodden fabric that clung to its fragile form. He cradled it carefully against his chest. No movement, no sound. Panic surged, sharp and cold. Not again. Not another child lost. With the baby secure in one arm, he worked to untangle the woman's body. Debris had snared her dress, and the current fought him at every turn. Finally, with a heave that strained every muscle, he freed her and began the slow, punishing journey back to shore. The mud sucked at his feet like grasping hands. Twice he stumbled, nearly going under, but the thought of the tiny life in his arms drove him onward. When at last he reached solid ground, he collapsed to his knees on the bank, lungs burning, arms trembling from exertion. The woman lay beside him, chest rising and falling shallowly, alive, but the baby. Takakota tore away the wet fabric and held the small form close, rubbing its back with his calloused palm. Nothing, no cry, no breath. A sharp, cold dread pierced his heart. No, he whispered hoarsely. His fingers trembled as he tilted the tiny head back, remembering faintly things he'd once heard from a missionary doctor. He pressed his mouth gently over the child's and breathed, willing life back into its fragile body. One breath, two, a tiny wet cough, then another, and finally a sound, thin, wavering, but unmistakable. The baby's cry, relief hit him so hard his knees buckled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath until it came out in a shudder. The sound of that, criffrell yet defiant, felt like a miracle in the vast silence that had been his world. The woman stirred beside him. Her eyelids fluttered, open, revealing eyes as blue as the prairie sky after rain. Fear flickered there the moment she saw him, Navajo man, kneeling over her child. She gasped, desperate sound, and tried to pull the baby to her, but her arm gave out with a whimper. Of pain, safe, Takakota said in halting English, his voice rough from disuse. He raised his empty hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. You safe? Baby safe. She stared at him, still tense, but exhaustion dulled the sharp edge of her fear. Her gaze darted to the baby in his arms, its cries growing softer now. Please. My baby? She whispered, her voice hoarse. Takakota nodded and gently placed the child into her trembling arms. The woman clutched the baby tight against her chest, tears mingling with the rain on her dirt-streaked face. The storm clouds loomed above, and the wind carried a chill that cut through wet clothing like a knife. They couldn't stay here. My home, he said, gesturing toward the low hills. Close, warm, dry. The woman looked at him, her expression caught between fear and desperate hope. Lips parted, but no sound came. Then, with a small, shaky nod, she whispered, please. The trek to the Hogan was slow and grueling. Hannah, as she later told him her name to be, leaned heavily on Takakota. Her steps were uneven, her lips pale, her good arm clutching the shivering bundle of her baby Lily. The other arm hung limp, every jolt drawing a faint hiss of pain through her teeth. Takakota kept his pace steady despite the storm's cold fingers clawing at them. His every instinct screamed at him to leave them there on the plains before their presence brought danger to his door. But each time, his eyes darted to the baby's tiny face, wrapped in sodden cloth. That thought dissolved like smoke. By the time they reached his dwelling, the drizzle had turned to icy needles of rain. Takakota's Hogan sat low against the hill, nearly invisible from a distance. A simple earthen shelter built with his own hands long ago when Ara was still alive.
Back when he had imagined it housing laughter and life, not just his solitary
breath. He led Hannah inside and helped her to a blanket near the cold hearth. She sank down with a choked sigh, still clutching Lily, her blue eyes darting nervously around the dim interior. Takakota knelt by the hearth and worked quickly to coax a fire to life. Sparks leapt, caught, and soon warm orange light flickered. Against the Hogan walls, chased the chill, softening the air with the scent of burning cedar. Hannah's shoulders eased fractionally. The fear in her gaze hadn't vanished. It lingered there like a coiled snake butt. Exhaustion had dulled its bite. "Your arm?" "Doc," Coda said softly, his English careful but rough. He gestured to her left side. She looked down as though only. Now remembering the injury, the sleeve was torn, the limb swollen and bruised. "Broken?" he asked. She nodded faintly. I think so." He retrieved strips of cloth, a smooth branch, and water heated over the fire. With movements both firm and gentle, he fashioned a crude splint. Hannah flinched at his touch but did not pull away. She bit her lip until it turned white, suppressing. "Any sound of pain?" "Hold still," Takakoda murmured. When it was done, she leaned back, cradling Lily closer. The baby's cheeks were flushed now, her breathing soft but steady. Takakoda turned to prepare food. He had little to offer dried. Meat, maize cakes, a bitter herbal tea, but Hannah accepted it with quiet gratitude, sipping the tea in small careful gulps. They ate in silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and Lily's faint whimpers. "My name is Hannah," she said finally, voice tentative. In the dim space, her eyes met his across the flames. This is Lily." Takakoda hesitated, then replied Takakoda. Hannah's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. "Thank you, Takakoda, for saving us." He said nothing, only inclined his head. It hadn't felt like heroism, more like inevitability. He had seen a need and acted. But in truth, something had shifted inside him the moment he saw Lily's tiny form in the water. Something he thought long dead. The days that followed blurred into a fragile routine. Takakata rose early, tending his traps and gathering firewood. He fetched water from a nearby spring, always moving quietly so as not to startle Hannah. Remained wary, eyes tracking him as he moved about the hogan. But she accepted his care for Lily. The baby grew stronger each day. Her cries, at first jarring in the stillness of the hogan, soon became another thread in its fabric, soft, persistent, and strangely comforting. Once, as Takakoda knelt to place more wood on the fire, Lily's tiny fingers reached out, curling around his thumb with surprising strength. He froze, staring down at the fragile hand gripping his own. A warmth unfamiliar and tentative bloomed in his chest.
"Oh."
Memories flickered his own son, giggling as he grasped Takakoda's hair and pudgy fists. The memory brought a bittersweet ache, sharp yet no longer suffocating. But peace was a fragile thing. On the third morning, Takakoda spotted movement in the distance. 3 riders. Their figures small against the horizon, but growing closer. Settlers. Searching. Their voices drifted faintly on the wind, hard and impatient. No sign? Maybe engines got in. A cold dread settled in his gut. He knew how their minds worked, how swiftly compassion could be twisted into accusation. Returning to the hogan, he found Hannah spooning cooled tea to Lily. She looked up, reading the tension in his face immediately. "What is it?" she asked, her voice low. "Riders," he said simply, searching. Fear flashed across her features, stark and raw. "They'll think."
"Ow!"
"They'll think you." She couldn't finish. Takakoda didn't need her to. He knew what they would assume. A native man, a settler woman, and her child alone together would not be seen as a rescue. He said nothing. That night his jaw tightened. That night, as the fire burned low and Hannah dozed with Lily curled against her, Takakoda sat awake. His eyes stayed fixed on the flickering shadows dancing across the walls. He knew their time here was running out, and yet, in that moment, as Lily let out a soft sigh, in her sleep and Hannah's breathing grew slow and even, he felt an unfamiliar resolve harden in his chest. He would not abandon them. The next morning, the plains felt different. The air was heavy, oppressive, as though the land itself sensed danger creeping closer. Takakoda stepped out of the hogan just as the first orange streaks of dawn touched the horizon. His sharp eyes swept the distance, searching for movement, and there they were. Dust rose in faint plumes as 3 riders advanced, their figures small, yet unmistakably purposeful. Even from here, Takakota could feel the weight of their suspicious settlers searching. For Hannah and her child, his stomach clenched. He ducked back inside, his moccasins silent against the packed earth. Hannah looked up from where she sat near the fire. Lily nestled in her lap. The fear in her eyes flared instantly. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders," Takakota had said. "Close, searching." Hannah's face paled, and her arms tightened. "Protectively around Lily? They'll think you I know," he interrupted softly. He began moving quickly, gathering blankets, dried meat, and his water skins. Hannah's voice trembled as she watched him. "What are you doing?" "Cave," Takakota replied simply. "Safe. Hidden." "There's a cave." He didn't answer, but the firm set of his jaw said enough. Hannah rose carefully, wincing as her injured arm shifted. She held Lily tighter as Takakota wrapped a thick cloak around her shoulders. "Stay close," he instructed. "Quiet." They slipped out into the gray light of dawn, moving low along the folds of the land. Takakota's senses were sharp. Every sound magnified, the crunch of damp grass underfoot, the faint snort of a horse in the distance, the restless cry of a hawk overhead. He led them toward the hills, his strides long and sure despite the burden of supplies. Behind him, Hannah struggled to keep up, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she didn't complain. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a thicket of dense brush. Takakota parted the branches to reveal a narrow path winding upward. "This way," he murmured. The trail was steep and treacherous. Hannah stumbled more than once, her boots slipping on loose stones. Each time Takakota's hand shot out, steadying her. Lily whimpered against her mother's chest, but Hannah hushed her gently at last. The mouth of the cave appeared, a shadowed hollow in the rock face, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Inside it was cool and dark, the air smelling faintly of earth and lichen. Takako to set down their supplies and crouch near the entrance, peering out. The plains below were vast and deceptively calm. But he knew better. "They won't find us here," he said quietly. Hannah sank to the ground, her knees trembling. She clutched Lily to her chest, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Takako said nothing. His focus was on the world outside. On the faint trails of dust still visible near the horizon, the next hours passed in taut silence. Every sound, the creak of leather, the distant clatter of hooves, made Hannah flinch. Now Takota remained still, eyes trained on the land below like a hawk watching for prey. By mid-afternoon, voices carried faintly up the hill. "Must have gone this way? Check everywhere. Can't let him get far." Takakota's hand drifted to the rifle resting across his knees. He didn't want violence. But if they were discovered, he would not hesitate. Hannah's breathing quickened as heavy footsteps crunched closer. One of the riders was near, his boots scraping over loose rock. Takakota's muscles coiled, ready to spring. "Then nothing up here," another voice called. "Try along the river." The footsteps retreated, hooves clattered. Slowly then. Sounds faded into the distance. Takakota exhaled, only now realizing how tightly he'd been gripping the rifle. Inside the cave, Hannah pressed her lips to Lily's damp hair, rocking her gently. Tears streaked the dirt on her cheeks. "They'll kill you if they find us," she whispered. Takakota looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim light. "Then they won't find us," he said simply, but he knew they couldn't stay. In the cave forever, the settlers would return. And next time they might not leave so icily. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in muted golds and purples, Takakota sat by a small fire at the cave's mouth. He stared at the flames, his thoughts heavy. He had saved them from the river, but the world outside would never see it that way. To them, his kindness would be twisted into suspicion or worse. But even knowing that, as he glanced over his shoulder at Hannah and Lily sleeping in the corner of the cave, he felt no regret. For the first time in years, his life had meaning again. He would protect them, whatever the cost. The mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their jagged peaks dusted with early snow. For days, Takakota led Hannah and Lily through narrow trails known only to him, skirting open plains and weaving through thick forests. At night, they huddled. By small fires in hidden hollows, their voices hushed, listening for any sound that might betray the approach of pursuers. But each morning, the air grew cleaner, sharper. The clamor of the world below faded until only the sigh of the wind and the chirping of mountain sparrows remained. They found refuge in a secluded valley, cradled high among the peaks. The place seemed untouched by time, its grasses lush and streams clear as glass. Deer grazed in the meadows, and the distant sound of a waterfall sang faintly over the rocks. Here, Takakota began to build. He constructed a small shelter from logs and earth, hidden among dense pines. It was rough, but it offered warmth and safety. Hannah insisted on helping, despite the lingering pain in her arm. She gathered stones for the hearth and wove mats of reeds for the floor. Lily, now stronger and more alert, watched from a cradle fashioned from a hollowed log lined with soft moss. At night, they sat by the fire. Hannah told quiet stories of her life before the river, of a husband lost to fever, of dreams of reaching California dashed by tragedy. Her voice trembled at times, but in the glow of the flames, her blue eyes held a steady resolve. Takakota listened, offering only a few words of his own at first. He spoke of Ara and their son, in a voice thick with old grief and of the changes sweeping his people's land. Slowly, he found himself sharing more stories of the stars, of Coyote's clever tricks, of the spirits that walked the hills, and in return, Yuna listened without judgment. Lily thrived in the valley. She learned to crawl, then to totter on. Unsteady legs. Her bright laughter rang out as Takakota lifted her high onto his shoulders, her tiny hands clutching his braids. He taught her words in his language: sun, river, bird. Each time she repeated them in her small voice, a strange warmth bloomed in his chest, soft yet unshakable. Hannah watched them, faint smile curving her lips. But even in this hidden place, the shadow of the world below lingered. Takakota knew the settlers would never forget their loss. If they were discovered, mercy would not be given. One evening, as Hannah tucked Lily into her cradle, she turned to him with a question that had been building for days. Will we always have to hide? Takakota stared into the fire, the flames, reflecting in his dark eyes. Yes, he said simply. For now, she nodded, her gaze dropping. I wish it could be different. He reached out then, his hand brushing hers gently. Here, he said, it is different. We are alive. Together. Hannah's eyes shimmered. Together, she whispered. Time passed. Seasons shifted. The valley became their world. Takakota taught Hannah how to track small game and identify edible plants. She showed him how to sew stronger garments from scraps salvaged from her wrecked wagon. They worked side by side, their silence comfortable, broken only by Lily's playful squeals or Hannah's soft singing as she rocked her daughter to sleep. The three of them became a family not by blood, but by choice. One night, as Takakota held Lily in his arms beneath a sky freckled with stars, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The ache of loss was still there. He doubted it would ever leave, but it no longer defined him. The river that had taken so much had also given it, had swept Hannah and Lily into his path, tearing down the walls around his heart and forcing him to feel again. It had given him purpose, connection, and the quiet hope of a future. The world below remained as harsh as ever. Prejudice still simmered unseen like embers waiting for the wind. But in their hidden valley, they carved out a small, defiant existence. Here, sorrow had been tempered by compassion, and love, soft, quiet, but unyielding, had taken root in the unlikeliest of places.